All right, everybody. With us this week, we're with Chris Tkach, the founder and head brewer of Idle Hands Craft Ales, located in Malden, Massachusetts. An engineer by trade, and then a brewer fairly after that. So we're very excited to have Chris on to talk about all things from certified beer judging to the creation of Idle Hands and this journey along the way. And we were catching off air the trend in the craft beer scene of how, the hazy IPAs in New England might not just cut it for people anymore, even though I think the three people on this call are big fans of the hazy IPAs still. So, but Chris, welcome to the podcast, and how's everything going?
Thanks for having me on. Things are great. It's a Friday afternoon, and I'm looking forward to the weekend and spending some time with my family and not being in the brewery for a bit.
So let's kick things off. Introduce us to who is Chris, and I mean, what is Idle Hands Craft Ales to you? And you don't have to give out the entire playbook of this brewery that you have built, but who are you, and where did craft beer come into your life?
Wow, it's we've been at this business for coming up on 13 years now. So Idle Hands has been around since 2011. I personally got into craft beer back in I guess it was probably the early 90s. My uncle, he got me a kit one year for Christmas, and I kind of sat in the corner. I was living in the house with 8 other guys, in college, and one day we just decided to break it out and try making a batch of beer. I'd brewed some beer with my uncle prior to that, and kind of fell in love with the alchemy, I guess, if you will, of kind of taking some very basic ingredients and turning it into beer. And not just any beer, like something that was really interesting or flavorful. So that love of kind of that combination of science and artistry kind of really drew me into homebrewing at the time. So that kind of followed me through, my beginnings of my professional life, if you will. So I homebrewed a lot of times, right out of college, and finally got to the point where I'd gone back to school and got my MBA and decided that I no longer wanted to be in tech anymore, and decided to pursue a passion that had kind of been part of my professional or part of my adult life for a long time, and that's really kind of how Idle Hands got born.
Firstly, is my mic good before I ask this next question, or is it still hot, Will?
Yeah, you're good. Just keep it up.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So, Chris, I mean, you studied civil engineering at University of New Hampshire, right? We've talked to a lot of brewers, and I don't think we've had a lot of civil engineers that are brewery owners. So what made you want to be an engineer in the first place? And then, those first few years of your career, what was that like?
Yeah, so I've always been fascinated by buildings and structures. Even when I was a little kid, I loved kind of architecture and looking at old buildings and kind of really appreciating the aesthetics of them all. So when I was in high school, I really wanted to be an architect. That was kind of my path. And then I ended up having a couple conversations with current architects, and they kind of talked me out of it. And so they're like, what you really want to do is, if you want to design structures and stuff like that, get into civil engineering and get into structural engineering in particular. So that's how I kind of pursued things. So my freshman year, I went to Rensselaer Polytech in Troy, New York. And then as a physics major, because I couldn't get into the engineering program. It was really weird at the time. I got like early acceptance to physics, and then, it was a questionable whether I was going to get into engineering. So I just decided to go to the school and think that I would transfer into the engineering program and whatnot. Ended up hating RPI and transferred to UNH after my freshman year into the physics program. Because that was the easiest path forward, and then took nothing but civil engineering classes. So it was funny. My advisor at the time, he was like, why are you taking all these civil engineering classes? I'm like, I'm not here for physics. I'm going to transfer into the engineering program. So he was a little bit perplexed, but eventually that happened. And spent, obviously the next 3+ years in engineering at UNH. went into my first structures class and said, yeah, this is nothing but plugging formulas and numbers into formulas, and this isn't really that fun. And then I was taking a couple soils classes, which is really kind of like, you have to take a wide breadth of these, engineering classes as you're coming through your undergrad. And I kind of really got fascinated by that whole aspect. Again, part of this engineering or math slash, artistry type of thing, because soils is a very, you might know what's kind of under the surface, you might not. And so there's a lot of more kind of interpretation and freedom to kind of come up with, design of a foundation than just plugging numbers into a formula. So that really captured my interest. And so I spent a lot of time just kind of pursuing foundation engineering classes and other geotech type of classes while I was finishing up my undergrad there. And then once I graduated in '96, I got my first job with a geotech engineering company, and spent about a year doing that and realized I didn't like that anymore either. So kind of fell back on some computer skills and just went to work for a company called Cabletron at the time as application development engineer, and just kind of grew from there. Got into IT consulting. Eventually went back to school to get my MBA, graduated from that, went to a small software company and became the VP of engineering there, and then decided to hate that. I hated that, and changed my career one more time to a brewer. So here I am.
So before brewery and brewing as a whole, and we're obviously going to get into, that entry into this, from IT to consulting to engineering and everything in between, what are some of the things that you took away from that then helped you to where you are today?
Creating an awesome, trying to create a team, that's the biggest thing that I've taken away from probably all of my careers. And relying upon your team to kind of, do their job without micromanaging them. I led a lot of software teams when I was in IT consulting. And, in my earlier career, I was really kind of micromanaging them. And that became, a big kind of negative thing, I would say, in terms of, the project getting finished, the way we wanted it to and stuff like that. And I realized that I need to kind of be less hands-on, if you will, and kind of rely upon the skills of my team to kind of do what we are expecting them to do. Obviously, you want to, manage timelines and kind of the finished product and stuff like that, and provide feedback. But I think in the end, creating that team and allowing them the autonomy, to do their job has been one of the biggest things that I've taken away from my various professional careers. And I think, I've done a good job of that here at Idle Hands. We have a lot of we have a very small team, I will say, but that small team is very autonomous and very capable of doing a lot of different things. And they don't necessarily need me watching over them every single time. They want to try something new. And I encourage them to try new and fail. And as long as they learn from those failures, I think it's a good thing. And that just kind of helps build them as a stronger team player and a stronger person in their position. And hopefully, that resonates, in the next attempt at something.
So you're a VP of engineering at this IT services and consulting company. You decide, screw it, I'm going to go start a brewery. We'll go, you alluded to this, that your uncle gave you a homebrew kit when you were about 21. Where did your love for craft beer go from there? Like, what did you start brewing? How did your journey evolve from sort of home brewing to into commercial?
Yeah. So, I had brewed a variety of different styles as a home brewer. I got really into competing, entering my beers into competitions and getting feedback and taking that feedback and trying to improve the recipe or improve, my process. So, I'm trying to think back in the early days, a lot of it was probably pale ales and kind of, stouts and kind of other type of styles. And then I eventually got into a groove and started drinking a lot of kind of just Belgian styles of beers. And I started falling in love with those because they were a little bit more, not necessarily esoteric, but a little bit more complex in the flavor profiles that they were producing. And those flavor profiles were, very yeast derived versus kind of adding different hops. Or different malts or fermentation became a big part of kind of the flavor that you were trying to create in the Belgian beers. So, when we first started Idle Hands back in 2011, that was our focus. We focused on just strictly Belgian styles of beer, and in particular like the Abbey style, so doubles and triples and those type of things. And we kind of would branch out into saisons and some wild ales and stuff like that. And I actually love that part of Idle Hands because I still every once in a while I still have a Belgian beer. I'm like, oh man, I really miss brewing these type of beers. Unfortunately, we don't brew them that much anymore. It's just the market for them had kind of dropped out. We were at this inflection point early in Idle Hands' life about what direction to take the brewery. When we decided, all right, we're going to be a Belgian-focused brewery, where other places were, starting to go down the IPA road, and in particular the New England IPA road. So, we took a left and probably should have taken a right, early in our career. We'd probably be in a much different spot, I think, from a trajectory standpoint, if we had done that. But in the end, I don't know if I would have been as happy, just brewing IPAs. I'll be the first person to tell you that they're not my favorite styles of beer. I don't, when I go down to the tap room and grab a beer, I'm not grabbing a 4-seam. And it's not just because that beer's not excellent. It is for its style. It's just my palate just doesn't, I guess, like getting bowled over with hops all the time. So I prefer to find the nuanced flavors and other styles of beer that we produce.
Now, do you think that's a regional thing of Massachusetts and New England, or do you think it's becoming a craft beer scene across the country of these different directions?
I mean, New England is definitely the epicenter, I feel, of at least the New England IPA, hazy IPA style. And it's very, very difficult to compete with that style in this market with two of the juggernauts, that literally are at our back doors. But I can't really necessarily say what it's like across the rest of the country. I have some friends in different parts of the country that tell me it's not like that, and that their flagship IPA or flagship beer is not an IPA or a New England IPA, and that it's something like a brown ale or a cream ale or something like that. And to me, that just kind of just boggles my mind because it's been New England IPA or hazy IPA, in Massachusetts for, I don't know, probably the last 8 years at least, as kind of like the style to brew. So, I would love to kind of visit some of those other parts of the country and see what those other breweries are really doing in order to, make their cream ale or their brown ale be so popular.
So you've got your passion for brewing these Belgian beers and you're sort of getting your feet wet. You, for a long time, had actually been, and I'm not sure if you continue to do this, but you're a certified beer judge, right? You got that certification to judge beer and to actually like hand down the grades, to hand down the feedback. So how did that change your perspective on beer, and maybe what knowledge did you gain from that end of it that you hadn't had as the brewing side?
Yeah, I mean, like anything I get into in my life, I have a tendency to dig deep into it, whether it is beer brewing or home remodeling or soccer coaching or whatever it is. I'm not satisfied with kind of the 10,000 foot view of things. I need to get deeper and deeper and deeper into things to get a full understanding of what everything is. And so, as I was getting more into home brewing, I wanted to understand some of the feedback I was getting on my beers and why. And so the best way to do that was to kind of get involved with the judging side of things. And so I spent some time, obviously studying for my BJCP exam and tasting a lot of different beers and talking with other people that I was studying with and discussing that. And eventually sitting for the test and achieving that certification. I honestly haven't judged a beer in a competition since probably Idle Hands started in 2011. So I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm a beer judge anymore, but I think a lot of the information that I learned, in that program is valuable. A lot of the stuff that you talk about are off flavors and style specific guidelines and what makes a brown ale versus an IPA versus some other style of beer, and all that is very, very helpful when you're formulating recipes and trying to create a beer that is authentic to a specific style that you're aiming for. And Idle Hands plays a lot in that kind of traditional style marketplace. And I think the beers that we produce are pretty authentic to whatever style that we're trying to achieve.
So right off the bat, let's dive back to 2011 and probably a little bit beforehand, you decide to make this decision to jump. Why the name Idle Hands?
There's we started our brewery in Everett, Massachusetts, in a really dilapidated kind of warehouse. And we were trying to, as I had signed that lease, we were trying to figure out, my wife and I, what we were going to call a brewery. And one thing that we were adamant about doing was not calling it something that was geographically bound. We didn't want to be like Everett Brewing Company or, Malden Brewing Company or whatever it was. It just, to me, just seemed like a very mundane way of naming a business that creates very creative type of products. And so, my wife and I have been going back for, I don't know, a better part of a month, just throwing names back and forth and trying to figure out what we were going to call this new thing. And we were watching Basketball Diaries one night. And there's a line in there about Leonardo saying "idle hands are the devil's playthings," and it was like right before he goes back on the big heroin binge or something like that. Not a pretty weird way to take inspiration to some degree, but when we heard that, we both of us just looked at each other and said, "Let's call it Idle Hands." Because my wife would always say that your hands are always idle, and I was thinking I was always doing like things like this, like the Mr. Smithers kind of thing. And so it just kind of stuck, and we're like, yeah, we'll just call it Idle Hands. And we added craft ales onto the end of it, just to kind of give it some meaning. Oddly enough, I wish we would just call it Idle Hands Brewing, because that's what everybody else calls it now. And we make, probably 50% of our production is also lagers at this point. So it's, the craft ales thing is a little bit confusing, I think, to the consumer.
So, we talked about the name, we talked about where you were in your career, but what was it that actually said, that went off in your mind that you said, yes, we're going to go start this, right? We're going to go sign the lease on that warehouse in Everett and actually put pen to paper and get this done.
So I'm a big time skier. And I roped my wife into learning how to ski. And so we would go on ski vacations a lot. Back when I actually had a really decent paycheck from Tkach. We were coming back from a trip from Sugarloaf back in, I guess it was probably 2010, Sugarloaf, Maine, and driving through Portland. And I had heard about this new brewery called Maine Brewing Company. So I looked it up. I think it was probably on my phone. I looked it up and, figured out where they were, and like, oh, we'll just, swing by, see if anybody's there, and, see what's going on. And so, oddly enough, we stopped in. They were still over by where Allagash, is on the industrial way or whatever, and pulled in there. And I think Dan Kleben was there just randomly. And he said, he's like, I'm never usually here during the week. But he was super, super nice to us, kind of showed us around, spent about a half hour with us, kind of just talking about the business, whether they were profitable, what they were doing, and stuff like that. And I kind of came away from that conversation saying, all right, I've always wanted to create a brewery, but I never was willing to, dump $500,000 into doing it, or whatever it was going to be, because I just, that was a big risk. And so I realized that I could start this enterprise a lot smaller, and yeah, I might not be profitable for a year or two, but if I work hard enough and put my nose to the grindstone, that eventually this could turn into a more profitable business. And so that's what we did. We spent the next, I would say, year or so looking for a space and coming up, with the business plan and all this other stuff. And we opened in 2011, May of 2011, I think we brewed our first batch of beer, and then maybe opened the doors, to the tasting room at the time. We didn't have tap rooms in Massachusetts back then. Kind of just started this as a part-time type of thing. I would literally get home from work. I would go in and, do all the cellar work during the week, or possibly, and then maybe brew a batch of beer on the weekend, on a Sunday. The tasting room would be open on a Saturday. And I would work basically 7 days a week for, a few years on a part-time basis. Actually, the part-time thing was only about a year, I think about it. So, I at the time told my boss that, listen, this is kind of what I want to do, but I want to, I need to ease myself into this. Are you okay if I, cut back on my hours and work, 24 hours, 24-hour work weeks, and spend the other 2 days, working on the brewery. And he was pretty cool about that. And so that helped, that allowed me to, start getting our beer out into the shelves and distributing the beer to some of the local watering holes. And, I did that again for a year. And then eventually I'm like, all right, I need to rip the Band-Aid off. I can't continue to, work 7 days a week doing this. And if I want this business to grow, I need to spend more time in the business and working on the business than kind of just, going through the motions. So that's what I did.
That's super interesting that your boss was, acceptable about that kind of proposal, because I feel like that's not something that would be so common now. So that's pretty cool to hear. But it's funny that you mentioned about the name a couple points ago, because it easily could have been Everett Brewing Company. And then we hear 4 months after you guys start that this plot of land that you're located on is now going to be the home of Encore Casino in Everett.
Yeah.
So were there ever rumblings about that beforehand, or was this something that hit your door, very soon after your doors opened and you had to obviously scramble to find that new location?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like right after we opened. So again, we opened in 2011. That casino, broke ground in, I don't know, 2016 or so, something like that. So there were a few years, where we were operating in Everett, and everything was great until, I come in one day and then there's a notice taped to my door saying, you're being evicted. You have 30 days to get out. And that was, I want to say that was February of 2014, maybe. It was February of 2015. I don't exactly remember when it was. But I do remember it was one of the snowiest Februaries that Boston had seen in many, many years. And I'm like, there's absolutely no way I'm going to be able to move out of here in 30 days, find a new location, set up a new brewery. And so what turned out is, the landlord of the building, of the land, had basically sold everything out from underneath, all of his tenants. And there was like 20, 30 tenants in this kind of like small business center. When everybody got something taped to their door saying you have 30 days to get out. And so it was a very difficult time, not just for myself, but, for, everybody else that was kind of there. I had a bunch of businesses that were in the same boat, and they're like, what are we going to do? And like, all right, we're going to create a social media, firestorm about this. And that's exactly what we did. We contacted a bunch of news stations and just kept on hammering, how unjust this was, And we got a lot of attention for it. But it was a difficult time. I had a 1-year-old at the time, so I had a kid that was still in diapers, and couldn't even walk, and it was just like, all right, what are we going to do? So, eventually, I reached out to Malden and a couple other local communities and say, listen, I need to relocate my business. What do you guys have available? And Malden was awesome. They were so helpful. As soon as I sent that email, I got a telephone call, probably within an hour from their economic development officer. It's like, yes, we want you to come here. Can you be here tomorrow? Let's drive around, look at properties, and see what works for you. And they've been great. They've always been great. So.
Yeah, and off that, what was the draw for Malden specifically, besides the personal attention you got? Now that you're almost 10 years after the fact, how has it been being in Malden, and how integral is Malden to your success as Idle Hands?
I mean, I can't see us being anywhere else, to be honest with you. I love the community. It's the location that we found is right next to the downtown area. It's right next to a T-stop. It's on a major road. It's got lots of visibility, has its own parking. I mean, it checks off like all the boxes that I wanted. It's in a community that's growing with younger families and kind of our demographic kind of moving into it and stuff like that. So it's been great. I would say I wish my building was a little bit bigger and I had a little bit more parking, but in the end, those are minor inconveniences that we can kind of work around. But it's, I would say that from, all the other buildings and, communities I looked at, that Malden was by far just from what it offered from a physical standpoint, the best option for us.
Yeah, and off that, just a feel-good story for you as well. One of the first things that you Google Idle Hands that pops up is actually the story of Jake Douglas, which is really cool to see. For those that don't know, regular at Idle Hands who becomes one of your brewers, basically, right? He's got a couple of odd jobs and then decides, hey, maybe I'll tend bar, and one thing leads to another, and he's brewing beer, basically. Your rite of passage is having them produce a new beer. A couple articles get run on him producing Just Jake, which is a clone of PBR, basically. So, yep. I mean, what made him a good fit for you guys? And does that? I feel like that says a bit about your culture at Idle Hands, where a regular becomes someone that can ramp up, and you guys take a bet on him having the right attitude and all that stuff, and making him one of your production brewers. So what just your thoughts and comments about that story.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to rewind a little bit about this, just because I've always been very very loyal, I guess, to people that have helped Idle Hands out. So if you look back through our history, a lot of our brewers were volunteers at one point in time, back in our old location in Everett, helping us bottle. Brett Bauer, who was our head brewer at the time when we first opened Malden, he was a volunteer back in Everett. Xander, who then succeeded Brett, he was also a volunteer at one point in time, former bartender, became assistant brewer, became head brewer. And so Jake kind of followed that same path. He was one of those guys that we were looking for a bartender, and our taproom manager was like, well, we got this guy, Jake, he comes in, he's super, super interested about the beer. He's looking for something new and exciting to try. And he'd worked in, I think, a Starbucks or something like that. So he had some kind of, front of house experience. I'm like, all right, well, let's hire him on part-time as a bartender, see how it works out. And he just, he took that opportunity to start learning more and more about the production side of things. And so he would ask all these questions about the brewers, like, oh, well, how is this made and why are you doing this, and so forth. So he, just through his own curiosity, expressed that kind of interest. And so when it came time for us to, hire, another assistant brewer, we brought Jake in. He's like, all right, so, here's the keg washer, here's how it works. Start off washing kegs. And so that's how he got started. He would be like, all right, Saturdays or, Saturday mornings, he'd come in and wash kegs. And then he'd, start working on the canning line. And then eventually it just kind of grew and grew and grew his responsibilities to the point where we needed him more out back than we needed him out front. It's been one of those stories where he's a sponge. He will absorb anything you tell him, and he's a hard worker, and he's a great personality, and everybody loves him, and it just was a perfect fit for everybody.
No, but I mean, stories like that is definitely what, makes a brewery like yourself special, right? The beer is one thing, but it's the people that build that beer and how they came along in the journey is another. So definitely appreciate you sharing that. So as we head into 2024, I mean, you're over a decade into the business. What's going on with Idle Hands now, and what do you have in store for the next couple months and the rest of the year?
Yeah. It's crazy to think this has been, we're coming up on 13 years of this business. I've had a couple of people come up to me. It's like, oh, you're one of the OGs. I'm like, I'm not, but thanks for making me feel really, really old. We're at this point now where the market is really kind of shifting around. Nobody quite knows what's going on. We've had a lot of success with brewing some of these classic styles in the tap room, so we want to kind of start taking those things forward and pushing them out, into the wider market and see how they resonate there. We have, a test batch of our blueberry ale that's going to go. That's on in the tap room, and that's been outselling 4C on a pretty regular basis, which is crazy to think that just a fruited blueberry ale. Not sour by any stretch of the imagination, just simple blueberry ale is crushing it in the tap room. So it gives me some good confidence that, this is going to actually hopefully work well in the market too. So, that'll be rolling out for the summer, and we just continue to, brew these small little 10 barrel batches of kind of classic styles that seem to really be resonating a lot with people. Our beer 4CM is, it's not doing as well as it used to in distribution, and we're starting to also see it not do as well as it used to in our tap room. So there's room for other beers, and it's trying to find what that is and what the consumer is looking for, and trying to, not chase the trends that I think a lot of breweries have a tendency to do, to, come up with something and instead look, inward and say, all right, well, who are we? What do we represent? And how are we going to approach that, from a marketing standpoint and also from a beer standpoint, and then, creating that product and following through on it.
Yeah, on the trend chasing piece too, do you ever see a world where you'll hop into the seltzers and really get aggressive in sours or anything like that, or what?
I mean, we've made those.
Find yourself more like
beers. Yeah, we do have a fruited sour ale. It's not smoothie. It's fruited sour. It's not, you pour it out of the can, it doesn't gloop. But what we've found is that, as we produce these other fruit styles of beer and even seltzers, that those beers become less and less part of our portfolio, and part of our sales. So I think at some point you'll see our fruited sour ales go away altogether. And so to your point, we do brew a seltzer only for the tap room. I have no aspirations of marketing that beyond that. And that's only because we need something that's non-beer, based in the tap room for the people that come in here that just don't like beer. So we launched that at the end of last year, really the beginning of this year, and it's been doing fairly well. So what we do is we brew a unflavored seltzer. We can it so it doesn't take up one of our tap lines, and then when somebody orders one, we will use kind of like the old barista trick of adding flavorings to the glass and then pouring it into the glass to give them a variety of different kind of flavor profiles that they're kind of looking for. So that seems to be working fairly well for us. So And it gives another option for, the non-beer drinkers that come in with a group that want to have something different.
Yeah, super exciting to see that you're sort of staying true to your roots, but also, evolving and catering to that other part of the market too. So where can our listeners find Idle Hands beer, either at the tap room or somewhere else? Where can they drink at Idle Hands Craft Ale?
Yeah, so I mean, the best place obviously is to get it fresh from the source. Right here in Malden is we have our tap room. It's open 6 days a week, Tuesday through Sunday. We have food pop-ups on Fridays and Saturdays, and sometimes Sundays. So you can come down here, on a Saturday afternoon and try our beers, and also try some, interesting cuisine. Those food pop-ups rotate every single week or every single day that we have one. So one day it could be barbecue, the next day it could be, lobster rolls, the next day it could be empanadas, who knows, it's always changing. But outside of that, we distribute only in Massachusetts. So you should be able to find our beer, by and large, at any kind of place that's going to carry a good selection of craft beer across the state. That's, where we do it. Sometimes we send some stuff down into Rhode Island, but not very frequently. And we're really trying to kind of keep our beer fresh and local as much as we possibly can. And the best way to do that is to keep it in state. So.
Awesome. Well, Chris, we appreciate the time. Thank you so much. Good luck in the next couple months, and we're looking forward to swinging on by and grabbing some beer.
You're welcome. Yeah, let me know when you guys come by.